Do you think that being well, I guess since you said like since you're in the tech industry, this probably won't happen to you as much. But I was gonna ask, did you think that not only since you're considered a minority or a woman of color, um, would being a minority and a female put you at risk even more of being
I think so
underpaid?
for sure. And yes, I am still in the tech industry, but we still see issues like that happen. Like it's not just if you're focused on paying, maybe the pay is the same. But when it comes to executive positions, promotions and things like that, there's definitely a lack of Asian American leadership, especially Asian American, well, female leadership.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, that kind of goes into an article I read about. It's like you get the position, but you're still underemployed, as they would say, because you went to school, you did all this training, and it's like you're still not getting paid that
Right.
same level because you're not that
Exactly.
position. Yeah. So just that's all the questions I have. But I just wanted to go back and kind of reflect. Um, do you feel like there's been a decrease in the publicity towards the Asian American hate crimes that have gone on?
I think I think so. Like, I still hear about it, but people are just talking about it and not proposing solutions to it, which I think is the main problem.
Yeah, I asked that because I thought about it as I was talking to. I talked to another interviewee, and she was saying that she feels like you probably wouldn't really hear about in the news as much, and like the most that she's seen anyway has been through social media or following certain people that talk
Yeah.
about it. Yeah, and so yeah, has there just been any kind of like increased fear for you to just do typical? Like I know you talked about social media, how you kind of had to be a little more comfortable with that because of some harassment you had going on. Was there ever a time where you felt that it was kind of scary to just go outside and do like typical daily activities because of what's going on?
Um, mm, Personally, I just because of the quarantine, I haven't really gone out as much. Um, and even like I do have like that fear in the back of my head, like what if someone, thinks like I'm blank and blank and like tries to do something. But overall, because I just haven't had as much experience going out and that kind of stuff, no, I wouldn't say it's like a big fear. It's just like in the back of my head kind of thing.
Yeah. And do you ever think that you might get to a point where that might not be in the back of your head, or do you feel like it's going to be a long time before that ever kind of goes away?
I think it's gonna be a long time. Like, I think it's just because of like the economic war with China. There's always gonna be that tension. And that translates into tension with Chinese Americans, and people can't tell that I'm not Chinese. So,
Mm. And I guess another thing about since you said that, it kind of reminds me how you talked about how all Asian Americans kind of lumped together.
mhm.
So, just what kind of effect do you feel like that has on Asian Americans to just be kind of lumped into one? There's so many different cultures and backgrounds.
It's in terms of negative things, like it kind of erases a lot of cultures. Like, people don't realize the difference. So, like, um, among people and like their experience in America is going to be pretty different from a Chinese American in America. But and that causes like people not to really focus on issues that plague the different ethnicities. But in terms of positive things, I think because or I don't know if you could call it positive, but Asian Americans like feel detached from their culture, so they create like there's a different Asian American culture now, like the like boba tea raves, or like at least East Asian boba tea raves, like even music, 88 Rising, K-pop has been big, things like that like they flock to try to find a sense of connection with their culture, even though it's not really their culture, it's like the Asian American culture.
Right, right. And another question I had, talking about struggles being kind of hidden. Do you feel that certain because there's talk that there's not a whole lot of media portrayal of Asian Americans in general, but the portrayal you do get, and like it was just a Time article that I read that it
Mhm.
mentioned like Crazy Rich Asians and another show that I can't remember the name of at the moment. I think it's called Bling Empire, and it just said how that kind of goes to the model of minority myth, and how it's kind of portraying Asians as rich and successful and not really struggling. So do you feel like that kind of has that can also have like a negative effect?
I think that portrayal, people don't realize that a lot of these people aren't Asian American. They're usually Asian. Like for example, Crazy Rich Asian. That's like old. That was like old money in Singapore. They were Singaporean, not Asian American. Um, and so yeah, it's cool. There's also usually a lack of diversity in these things. In these shows, like they tend to be just East Asians or like, you know, like the pale Asians. So I don't know. In terms of representation, more is good, but uh, better representation is needed too.
Definitely. And I think that's just I guess that's kind of a common ground where like with Black culture and Asian culture, how it's like we get representation, but we also both in some ways can agree that better representation is definitely needed, even though there might be
Hmm.
more, but you still want to be picky about how are we being represented.
Yeah, like if every show had like a Asian nerd to make fun of, like yeah, sure that's more representation, but it's also like fulfilling stereotypes. So
Yeah, just like the ones you mentioned earlier about where you felt that being the butt of the joke, and
hmm.
that's unfortunately that's kind of what reinforces people to act that way because I guess they feed off of what they see on TV, and so they're like, oh, that must be okay to do in real life. When in reality, you know,
Right.
I
Hmm.
mean, most people probably know. You have some people that'll know, like obviously you can't do the same things you see on TV, but not everyone like that.
Yeah.
And so, the thing I'm asking everyone at the end of the interview is for anyone who sees this or is watching or listens in, and that they're struggling with their mental health and they feel like they can't go to anyone for whatever reason. Maybe it's because of the things we talked about, it just not being a comfortable topic for them with their family or friends. And just what would you say to them as they're going through this?
First, it's like it's not your fault. Like it's not your fault that you're being harassed or that you were born a certain race or look a certain way. Um, and I would recommend them to do a lot of research and reading into um, like the culture and see that other people are also experiencing the same issues and that you're not alone in this. And if you can't turn to like family or friends, usually, like for example, if you're in college, there are mental health services. They might not be the best, but they're a start. And if you're able to like afford therapy, like definitely look for a race conscious therapist that can help um, delve into that as well.
And yeah, that was one thing I meant to ask. And also, I'm not sure if we just earlier, but just you personally, how did you kind of, I believe you said you mentioned you had friends that you talked to, but like, how did you just kind of like get past okay, I need to just get through this. I need to go talk to someone or just share this with somebody so that I can feel better.
Yeah, so the acceptance came from seeing other people be comfortable with who they are. They weren't Asian or anything, but seeing that they faced more struggle than I did, but were a lot more comfortable with their identity and didn't let uh or well at least they recognized that first of all that it's not their fault for anything and that they worked towards finding justice and equality, which I think was what inspired me to change my view on it as well.
So you would definitely say that. So seeing someone else be so open and seeking that change for themselves, that inspired you to do the same.
Yeah, like finding those role models definitely helps, I think.
Hmm. And oh, also I was going to ask, what would you say to just people who? Because I was talking to someone about the project I'm doing and how I mentioned that it's going to be, it's supposed. To, I'm trying to make it as diverse as I can with minorities as in Black, Asian, Hispanic, just as much as I can get. And they kind of they made this comment saying that, well, I don't really. They said that they don't really think that Asians really face discrimination. So, what would you say to anyone who kind of doesn't really believe that Asian Americans really face any struggles or discrimination in America?
So they're perpetuating the model minority myth. And I understand why people think that, because that's been spread by media, like time and time again. But I would recommend them to actually look up the statistics and see like how much the difference in the median wage is between the different ethnicities. Like people are like, oh yeah, Asian Americans make so much money, but you're combining like all these like rich immigrants coming in,
Mm-hmm.
or these like highly skilled immigrants coming in with people who are coming from the bottom, like fleeing war, fleeing, discrimination in their own country. And then they're also not recognizing the different types of discrimination.
Mm-hmm.
Like in culture, like Asian people, like Asian jokes are the most commonly accepted jokes because it's often assumed that Asian people can't stand up for themselves in a sense. Um, so like harassment and things like that, we're often seen as weaker, and that's why jokes about us are usually allowed.
Mm-hmm. And just, I know there's to something like this, there's obviously no like one solution or just something that is going to change overnight. But just what do you, in your opinion, what would you say is probably going to be um, solutions? I guess what's going to be that turning point that's going to kind of um, get us in a better direction where you wouldn't. I'm sorry, I'm trying to figure out how to word this. So
No
okay,
worries.
so just I guess what I'm getting at is what change do you think needs to be made? Like how is society supposed to get to that change of not making these making Asians but the joke and just decreasing that harassment and just kind of I guess more awareness of what's going on instead of assuming that all Asian Americans are okay.
I think, for example, the like showing that Asian hate crimes are going up and things like that, seeing if there is action and not it's not just words. And even like people are taking action because of like of these stereotypes that people keep pointing out, like keep perpetuating. And I think that things like that can only change through education. Um, I just I feel like for we're kind of like Asian Americans and Black communities actually have been working together to overcome discrimination for a while. Like Asian Americans first fought against like discrimination in schools, and then even though that didn't work out, it helped lead to um, more cases in the future. And then it's just important. And then also like we fought with like uh his Hispanic workers, Latino workers in California, migrant workers looking for better working conditions and things like that, especially like Filipino workers fought towards that. So Asian American activism is, again, I'm using a monolith, but especially with like Filipino Asians, they have been like very prominent, but people don't learn about it. People don't educate themselves about these activists and how they've also worked with civil rights in the past and things like that, just because we're a smaller minority.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and usually have like different attitudes towards discrimination. Like for example, like I said, like just deal with it. Don't fight it, kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I was actually going to ask. It's funny how you mentioned how Asian activists have helped out with these different movements. Because I was going to ask you if you feel like there's kind of like a disconnect between the minority groups as far as what each of us struggle with,
Hmm.
and if there's this kind of I guess disconnect because maybe one group feels that they go through more than the other group, or they feel like they have it better than another group. If that makes
Oh
sense.
yeah, the term oppression Olympics, quote unquote.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I think that's just like a result of people trying to divide us. We have more in common than we think. And at the end of the day, we have a common enemy, and that's white supremacy.
Mm-hmm.
And I wish people would recognize that. before coming at each other, and blaming each other, because that's like what they want to happen.
Exactly. If you could elaborate, because you said we have more than common than we think. So if you can just elaborate on the similarities that you're referring to.
Yeah, so things like wage gaps, not like being passed over for other promotions, and that's just like in the workforce, and then facing discrimination in general. That's something that we all face, just for the color of our skin. And then even though there are definitely a lot of different like differences, like for example how we interact with police, or like with different like ICE agents and things like that. Like we face like different issues. Like for example, Vietnamese refugees under Trump, they were recently a lot of their, how do I describe it? A lot of their citizenships were revoked and things like that. Not
Mm-hmm.
revoked. I don't remember. There was like a law that made it so that they had to get deported. Things like that. Like we also face immigration issues. Uh, and yeah. So it's just we have more in common than at least uh, we do with white supremacists. So it's better if we work together to overcome that first.
I think you're absolutely right. Another similarity I thought of as you were talking about it that I noticed with mental health, in at least mental health, it seems like, and I haven't spoken with any Hispanic interviewees yet, but um, it just seems like we all kind of, the thing that the minority groups have in common is that we're not really open with mental health as our white peers might be. And I think that's has to do with because um, in many of our cultures, we're so heavily based on religion for the most part,
Mm-hmm.
whether that's Christian, Catholic, or Buddhist, or just any. And then most families will tell you, or most parents will say, oh, just pray it and it'll go away, rather than actually seeking help. And I think that's another common thing that minority groups share as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you're definitely right. I think you're right about that we have a lot more in common than we think. It's just a matter of coming together and helping each other out to face some common ground and solve the problem. Or
Yeah. Cool.
yeah.
Are those all the questions?
Yeah. Is there anything else you wanted to add as far as discrimination or any personal experiences with it, or just any further thoughts or opinions?
No, I think I articulated everything already.
All right. Well, thank you so much